My sister-in-law screamed, "I don't need you anyway." I calmly said, "Prove it." What happened next left her regretting every word she spoke. The room shook with her voice. She stood there with her fists clenched, eyes burning with fury, as if those words were meant to cut me down to nothing. And maybe, once upon a time, they would have. But in that moment I just stood there, calm, watching her. My reply was simple, steady, like ice poured over her flames. Prove it. The silence that followed was heavier than the fight itself. She blinked, as if she hadn't expected me to call her bluff. I thought about all the years that led up to this moment, the nights I stayed awake taking her calls when she said no one else cared enough to listen, the countless rides I gave her when her car broke down, the money I slipped into her hands when she swore she was desperate and would pay me back, though I knew she never would, the advice I gave when she begged for guidance, even as she rolled her eyes at me later in front of others. Every memory flashed like lightning in my head. She needed me more than she ever admitted, and yet here she was, screaming that she didn't, screaming that I was nothing, that I didn't matter. But this time, I didn't fight back. I didn't beg her to recognize the sacrifices I had made. I didn't list the countless times I had been the one to pick her up when she fell. I just looked at her and let my silence do the talking. My words, "Prove it," hung in the air like a challenge she wasn't ready for. Her face shifted for just a second. Beneath the anger, I saw the flicker of doubt, the tiny crack in her confidence. Because deep down, she knew. She knew how much she leaned on me. She knew how many times she had come running when her world collapsed, and I was the one who stood there holding the pieces together. She knew, but pride wouldn't let her admit it. So she lifted her chin, turned her back, and stormed off like she had won. But I knew better. As the door slammed behind her, the silence of the house wrapped around me. It was the kind of silence that felt final, that carried the weight of every unspoken truth between us. I sat there thinking of every sacrifice I had made, every piece of myself I had given up to keep her steady, and how easily she had dismissed me with 7 careless words. "I don't need you anyway." It was almost laughable. She had no idea what those words meant, no idea what life without me really looked like. She thought independence was just a phrase she could throw around to win an argument. She thought pride would feed her when the fridge was empty or comfort her when no one else picked up the phone. She had no idea that her arrogance was about to be tested in the cruelest way. Reality. So I stayed quiet. I didn't chase after her. I didn't try to explain. I didn't argue. I simply let her walk out with her pride, while I held on to my calm, because life has a way of teaching lessons louder than any words I could ever say, and she was about to learn exactly what it meant to prove me wrong. When she screamed that she didn't need me, the words replayed in my mind like a cruel joke. Because the truth was, she had needed me more than anyone else ever had, over and over again. I could list the moments like chapters in a book, the late-night phone calls when she was crying on the bathroom floor because her friends had ditched her. Who answered every time? Me. The mornings when her rent was due and she suddenly remembered she didn't have enough. Who quietly handed her cash and told her not to worry? Me. I remembered the time her car broke down in the middle of the highway. It was pouring rain, and she called me before she called anyone else. I left everything I was doing to drive across town, soaked to the bone, just to make sure she was safe. She hugged me then, told me she didn't know what she'd do without me. Funny how quickly words like that evaporate when pride takes over. She always mocked me in small ways, little digs about how I was too serious or too available. She laughed when people said I was dependable, as if that was something to be embarrassed about. But when no one else showed up, when her so-called friends stopped answering, when her family brushed her off, I was the one standing there. Every single time. The realization hit me hard that night after our fight. She had taken my presence for granted so deeply that she actually believed she could survive without it. She had convinced herself I was replaceable, that someone else could do what I had done for her, or worse, that she didn't need anyone at all. But the truth was, I hadn't just been a part of her life. I had been the safety net beneath her entire existence, and she had cut the strings with her own hands. The anger boiled under my skin, not because she hurt me with her words, but because she had erased everything I had ever done with a single careless outburst. Years of sacrifice, loyalty, patience, gone. Just like that. I realized she never really saw me. Not for who I was, not for what I gave. She only saw what she could take. That night, I made a decision, a quiet one. I wasn't going to fight for her respect anymore. I wasn't going to list my sacrifices like receipts she never planned to pay back. I wasn't going to keep showing up just to be mocked later for being the one who always showed up. I chose silence. I chose to step back, not with a grand announcement, not with another exhausting argument, but with quiet distance. I would let her have her chance to live without me. I would let her prove those words she screamed with so much arrogance. And when the reality of her choices hit, she would understand what it really meant to lose the one person who never let her fall. Because, for the first time, I wasn't going to catch her. At first, she wore her pride like a crown. She wanted the world to see how free she was without me. Her social media was full of captions about independence, about not needing anyone. Pictures of nights out, drinks in hand, arms around people she barely knew. She was loud, bold, desperate to prove she was right, and for a while, maybe she even believed it herself. But I watched from the sidelines and I saw the cracks begin to form almost immediately. The bills she never thought about started piling up. The rent notice on her door came sooner than she expected. She had always assumed someone would catch her when she stumbled, me. But this time, there was no one. And the weight of her own choices began to press down. The friends she thought she could lean on vanished as quickly as they appeared in her posts. Promises of support turned into excuses. Invitations dried up once the novelty of her freedom wore off. I knew it was only a matter of time before loneliness crept in, but even I was surprised by how quickly it showed in her face. Those smiles she posted online were stretched too thin, her eyes empty. Still, I won't lie, watching it unfold hurt me too. There were nights when I thought about stepping in, when the instinct to protect her nearly pulled me back. After all, it had been second nature for so long. But every time that thought rose up, I reminded myself of her words, screamed with such certainty, "I don't need you anyway." It stung to replay them, but it also gave me clarity. She had made her choice. She wanted to prove she didn't need me, and I was finally strong enough to let her try. My silence wasn't cruelty. It was strength. It was me refusing to keep saving someone who mocked me for doing exactly that. And as the days passed, something inside me shifted. The heartbreak that had once consumed me slowly loosened its grip. For the first time in a long time, I slept without waiting for the sound of her call. I lived without checking if she needed me. I breathed without carrying the weight of her struggles on my shoulders. She was stumbling, but I wasn't there to catch her. And as painful as it was to watch, it was also freeing. Because her downfall was no longer my burden. It wasn't my responsibility to pick up the pieces she had shattered with her pride. It was her reality now. I realized I wasn't the weak one in this story. I wasn't the desperate, insecure person she painted me as. I was the strong one, the one who finally walked away, the one who chose silence over another endless cycle of giving and being mocked for giving. She thought losing me meant gaining freedom, but all it gave her was a mirror, one she couldn't look away from. And in that reflection, she was finally seeing what I had known all along. She was never ready to stand alone. The turning point came faster than even I expected. Her proud declarations of freedom began to fade, replaced by silence on the very platforms where she had once flaunted her independence. The friends who had clapped for her rebellion slowly disappeared. The same people who told her she was so strong, when she screamed that she didn't need me, were nowhere to be found when the nights grew colder, when the bills stacked higher, when the loneliness became unbearable. I watched from a distance as her carefully crafted image unraveled. She began to stumble in ways she could no longer hide. Missed rent, a car repossessed, shifts at work she couldn't keep up with. Even the way she carried herself changed. Her once defiant shoulders slouched, her eyes tired, her laughter brittle and forced. The independence she bragged about had turned into chains she couldn't lift. And then, slowly, the first signs of her reaching back out appeared. A casual message here and there. "Hey, how are you?" A photo sent with no explanation. A late-night text asking, "Are you awake?" As if the old habit of me always answering could be resurrected. But I didn't reply. My silence stretched longer with each attempt, and though it hurt me to hold back, I knew it was the only way she would ever learn. The truth was, her downfall wasn't just punishment. It was her lesson. For years, she had believed I was a safety net she could kick aside whenever her pride needed a boost. For years, I had proven her right by always coming back, always saving her. But now, my absence screamed louder than any lecture ever could. She was beginning to feel the weight of those words she had thrown at me like a weapon. "I don't need you anyway." Meanwhile, my own life was slowly finding balance again. Without her chaos consuming my energy, I began reclaiming my time. I focused on myself, on the things I had set aside to always be at her call. I slept better, I ate better, I reconnected with parts of myself I had lost in the constant storm of her needs. With every step I took forward, I felt lighter, stronger. The contrast between us became undeniable. She was unraveling, drowning in the very freedom she once celebrated, while I was quietly rebuilding, finding peace in the silence she once mocked. She had thought my calm meant weakness, that my quiet meant surrender. She never understood that silence can be the loudest form of strength, the sharpest form of truth. Every ignored call, every unanswered message, became another layer of the wall she had built herself into. And though I felt a pang of sadness each time I saw her trying to claw her way back, I knew this was the moment she had created for herself. She had screamed for independence, and life had given it to her in its rawest, cruelest form. She had wanted to prove she didn't need me, and now she was learning, piece by piece, exactly what that meant. The climax came one evening when I heard a knock on my door. At first, I thought it was nothing. Maybe a delivery, maybe a neighbor. But when I opened it, there she was, my sister-in-law, the same person who once stood in my face and screamed she didn't need me. Except this time, she didn't look powerful, she didn't look proud, she looked broken. Her eyes were red and swollen, her hair a tangled mess, her shoulders shaking as if the weight of the world was pressing down on her. For a moment, she didn't even speak. She just stood there, tears running freely down her cheeks, until the words finally cracked out of her trembling lips. I was wrong. She tried to explain between sobs. How the friends who once cheered her on had vanished the second things got hard. How the bills kept piling up with no one there to bail her out. How the loneliness grew unbearable when no one answered her late-night calls. the calls that used to come to me. And finally, she whispered the one sentence she never thought she'd have to say. "I can't do this alone. I need you." I watched her, and for a second, the old instinct almost rose up in me. The part that had always jumped in to fix things, to soothe her, to save her from the messes she created. But it didn't take long for the memories to flood back. The night she screamed those words like a weapon. "I don't need you anyway." The arrogance in her eyes, the way she dismissed years of my sacrifices with one cruel outburst. So I didn't scream, I didn't gloat, I didn't throw her words back in her face, though God knows I could have. Instead, I did the one thing she never expected. I stayed silent. My silence wrapped around us, heavy and suffocating. She searched my face, desperate for a reaction, some sign of the man who had always rescued her. But that man was gone. In his place was someone who had finally learned that saving her was the very thing that kept me trapped. She begged then. Her voice cracked as she promised she'd change, promised she'd never take me for granted again, promised anything just to make me say something. But I didn't. I let her words fall to the floor, empty, like all the promises she had broken before. The silence was my answer, and it was louder than any revenge speech I could have given. She crumbled under it, realizing that she had finally proven her words true, that she didn't need me. Not because she was strong, but because I was no longer there. As I closed the door, I felt no anger, no joy, no triumph, just finality. She had been given the chance to prove her pride, and life itself had shown her the truth. And in that truth, she was left with nothing but regret. I walked away, not with rage in my chest, but with peace. She wanted to prove she didn't need me. And now she finally had.